run along and play. There's an awful risk telling that to children in some parts of the world, like Colombia. The capital, Bogota, is relatively safe. People can move around quite easily, in spite of the armed conflict in the South American country. But outside the bigger cities, you can't walk around carefully enough. Throughout Colombia, in addition to people being killed by them, civilians and government forces are maimed by landmines, also known as improvised explosive devices. Colombians know they may find them, or not, hidden next to schools, main roads, or homes. It's dangerous to run along anywhere. This is the territory of Nariño. Anti-government groups used to control a large part of it. They've been partly driven out, but the landmines are still harder to remove. Specialists say almost 2,000 people have been killed by mines in the last 7 years. Zoom in on Samaniego, a small city previously controlled by guerrilla groups. Not many journalists have been here. This reporter went to investigate the children's point of view. The army and guerrillas are still fighting in the jungle, and rebel groups also fight each other for control of the territory and the strong interest in cocaine. While that's going on, people in the villages try to lead a normal life, and it looks like they're managing, until the children start to tell their stories.
Bueno, mi familia, como mi abuelita, ella se quedaba en una casa.
My grandmother was living in an army barracks, and one day there was a firefight with the FARC rebels. My grandmother was hit by a stray bullet, and she died.
En ese contraataque, entonces mi abuelita pues recibió una bala, lo que le causó la muerte.
Pues últimamente en nuestro pueblo se está viviendo mucha violencia.
We are experiencing a lot of violence these days in our village. We used to be able to stay out late at night or go to work without any risk. But now everyone watches his back. The guerrillas control everybody. For the slightest suspicion, you can be kidnapped and killed. So there's a curfew. You don't see anyone in the streets. Everyone stays at home.
A altas horas de la noche ya no se encuentran así en el pueblo, sino que todos están en sus casas.
Pues mi experiencia fue que secuestraron a mi papá como hace.
My dad was kidnapped 3 years ago. I don't know if they still have him alive, if one day he will be freed to come back home, or if they leave him somewhere. It was horrible. The guerrillas said they wanted to check if he was walking a dangerous path as an informer. They would check what kind of people he was associated with, and depending on what turned up, they would decide what to do with him.
If this fear is felt in a small city, compare it with a village in the jungle. In El Decio, for instance, landmines are planted even closer to homes, and in areas the villagers are told not to go. If they do, the victims' families say they are made to pay to replace the exploded mine, around 150 euros. The Colombian army has control of the territory now, but keeping troops in the jungle is very expensive. Everybody knows, though, that as soon as the army pulls back, the rebel groups will return with their rule of violence. Schools are left mostly alone as long as they don't criticize the status quo. Many teachers have been murdered to set an example to keep people in fear. Schools are a threat for armed groups. An illiterate farmer is easier to recruit as an obedient soldier. Young girls are also under threat of being taken as sex slaves. Landmines also are effective tools of fear. A handicapped person carries more fear value than a dead one in places where a population might not otherwise cooperate with armed groups.
When I first came here, I was scared that I was risking my life. There were signs up everywhere saying, "Keep to the path, beware of mines." You were forced to go straight to your classroom with the children and to stay there. You couldn't go outside. If a child suffered an accident, you would be held responsible. The children have taken all this quite pragmatically in everyday life. When I arrived here 2 years ago, they used to tell me, "Watch out, teacher, that could be a mine. That little thing looks suspicious," and so on.
The European Union, the Red Cross and European governments are helping. For some, this help has come too late. Maria lost her child to a landmine. Couldn't even afford a funeral. The father of the boy had not wanted to go to the community meetings for landmine instruction. A local leader explains.
Sometimes when we meet, we tell people it is better to stay at home for the moment, or better not go in this field if something seems a bit tricky. But this guy used to live far away from here.
Life goes on in El Decillo, most of the time with very few men and a lot of women and children. The men work in the fields removed from the village and they come back once a week. So in the evening, the church is the only place where families can spend a bit of time together. Churches are more or less respected by the insurgent forces. The day starts early in El Decillo. 7 is after school time, but the grown-ups have been up since around 4:30. In spite of all the problems, they want to stay here. They refuse to be displaced to the big cities. The undeclared war, kidnappings, landmines have a common denominator, cocaine. It's the biggest source of money, and therefore the biggest source of trouble. Yet the vice-governor of the region insists that Colombia must not be held solely responsible for the global cocaine problem. Production is on one side of the coin, cocaine consumers on the other, and most of them are in richer, developed countries.
I
believe that people outside of Nariño and outside of Colombia have a feeling of shared responsibility for what happens here. The violence here is strongly linked to the cocaine. The cocaine problem belongs to those who produce it, but also to those who consume it. The entire chain is responsible for all this mess. So, the words common responsibility have to start being put into daily use in all the countries of the world.